Hello folks, this is another in my video series talking about Christian special education and ways we can think about being effective in teaching and learning when it comes to kids who struggle, or as parents or teachers, what we need to be thinking about as we're working with kids, and always focusing on it from the biblical perspective. And so today we're going to talk about Jesus as the master teacher and just focus on one specific area where he demonstrated some pretty amazing skills related to working with different people with disabilities. Part of the reason that I got interested in this particular subject was because I was a teacher and a professor in the Christian environment. I have nearly 30 years of experience working with young people and adults of varying ages and disabilities and struggles. And so I've been teaching in public schools, I've taught in private schools, I've taught as a university professor in methods courses, and so have a wide variety of experiences related to teaching kids. So I've had a couple of different experiences that really made me develop this particular lesson, and one of them was I had this administrator come to me at one point and sit down with me and say, okay, I want you to give me a list of each different disability, and then I want you to give me 2 or 3 things we can do to remediate that specific disability, like it was a formula. I was so shocked when they asked me the question that I didn't quite know how to answer at the time, and I thought, you know, Lord, give me some kind of biblical way of helping them to understand that this is just not an accurate way to assess working with people with disabilities. And so God gave me this study that we're going to talk our way through. And then the other thing that has happened to me is I've had parents come to me who were struggling and wanting some answers. And they told me that they felt stupid, that their child was made to feel stupid or lazy or sinful, and that the pressure of being like everyone else felt like it was crushing. They were desperate parents and they were looking for answers, and they were in Christian schools and in Christian environments. They felt like they had to fit into some kind of a mold that was almost unrealistic for the particular disabilities and struggles that they were working with at that point. And that was just saddening to me, that we were setting up some kind of a precedent in our environments for performance that was crippling the kids and the parents who were trying to work with them. So I started doing some thinking, and I think we've seen this possibly before. If you haven't seen it before, I'm going to go ahead and read it to you. For a fair selection, everyone has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. When we look at people in the Christian environment, God still has developed us in all kinds of unique and beautiful and different ways for his glory, and so we need to be thinking like Jesus does with this kind of thing. So what we're going to focus on for the next several minutes is this whole concept of Jesus and how Jesus individualized his instruction and help to just one disability, which was blindness, and 7 different ways that he worked with people who were blind, and some guiding principles that we can pull out of all of this. We can see some real biblical illustrations where he used the typical models of instructional remediation often seen in the school, both in public and private. Inclusion, self-contained, resource, plus some other things that he did in these situations. So first, let's look at some guiding principles. For disabilities do not all have the same cure, treatment protocol, or whatever based on a type. They just don't, and you're going to see as we go through this. The second guiding principle I want to look at is good teachers model what they tell you that you should do. Jesus certainly did that, which is why we're going to look down through this whole exercise today. But then here's a little freebie on the side for you to think about if you're teaching or if you're working for with little munchkins. Some need the sheet actually completely filled in. So what I'm doing right now on this screen is everything's all filled in, so they can see it and it's in front of them and they don't have to look at that in order to absorb. Some people need it where they can actually fill in as they're watching. So what I've done is I've put down below a link where you can download the sheet completely filled in. You can download the sheet with fill in the blanks. So you could stop right here in the video and go download that sheet and then keep filling it in as we go down through this. Or some people are auditory and they just need to sit and watch and listen, and they can't even use a sheet at all in order for them to get it. So that's just a freebie on the side, teaching tip for you. And I've done that with what I'm doing here. So those are available for you at the bottom to get if you want to just pause the video right now and get them. So let's go to our third guiding principle. Proverbs 18:13 says, if anyone answers a matter before he hears it, it's a shame and a folly to him. We have to ask questions. Do we really know what somebody else needs, thinks, or wants unless we ask them? In 1 Corinthians 2:11, who among men knows the things of a man except the spirit of that man which is in him? So these are some guiding principles that as we walk down through these situations and scenarios, you're going to see over and over again things like Jesus asking questions. Even though he knew already, he's asking questions to help people. All right, so let's look at the 7 different scenarios. First of all, the first one we have is several blind men. Now, the one disability that I decided to focus on for this was blindness. It's one disability, and yet with one disability, there's 7 different ways that we can look at this and see all the different things that Jesus did just with that one disability to point out the fact that one size doesn't fit all. And you can have the same disability as somebody else sitting right beside you, but there's something going on with you that may be different than the person beside you, and you need help in different ways. So I'm going to read these verses as we go through this so you hear those, and then we'll talk about some of the principles that come out of them. Matthew 9:28 and 29. And when he'd come into the house, the blind men came to him. And Jesus said to them, do you believe that I'm able to do this? And they said to him, yes, Lord. Then he touched their eyes, saying, according to your faith, let it be to you. He went where they were, but they still had to approach him. So he'd gone into a house, but these people still had to come to him. Then he asked them questions because he wanted to see what was going on in their heart, what they were thinking. He made them take ownership both of the disability and the help that they wanted, and the part of the outcome that they could control. And he touched them. So one of the things that we need to think about when we're working with young people is believing that they can overcome despite disabilities, and they can do something for the Lord despite a disability. And there's a piece of this where we really have to do things by faith. And God says, without faith, it's impossible to please him. And sometimes we have to ask God for the faith to trust when things don't make sense, and we have to walk with him by faith in the challenges that we face. And Jesus takes and puts that ownership on them. You know, how much do you think you have the confidence to work your way through this? Do you believe you can do this? And if you do, then according to that amount of belief, that's what's going to happen. So let's look at the next one. We had one person who has multiple disabilities. Matthew 12:22. Then one who had been demon-possessed was brought to him blind and dumb, and he healed him, so much so that the blind and the dumb one both spoke and saw. In this case, the issue is obvious. The remediation needed is obvious. There's no interaction needed. The person can't even talk. They can't see. They're not even able to communicate for themselves. Somebody else has to help them. And so the person, Jesus, who could help, simply did what was needed at that point. Sometimes when situations are really intense, then it's obvious that intense help needs to be given. So then we'll look at inclusion types of help. Matthew 15:30 through 31. Inclusion, for those of you that don't know, is a term that's used in the school systems for when we take people with disabilities and we include them in with everybody else as far as what's happening in a classroom or in an environment. So great crowds come to him, having with them lame, blind, dumb, maimed, and many others, and they cast them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them, so much so that the crowd wondered when they saw the dumb speak, the maimed sound, the lame walk, and the blind see, and they glorified the God of Israel. And in the same hour he cured many of infirmities and plagues and of evil spirits, and he gave sight to many who were blind. This is also in John 5. So in this situation, you're in the crowd and things are just happening, and the crowd has to stand back. They really can't do anything. They just stand back and marvel. They don't say much, but they marvel. They don't know how to help other than to bring people to Jesus who can help. And so sometimes that needs to happen. People are brought to us because they know that somebody needs help, but they can't help themselves. They just bring them, and then the individuals who know what to do can help, and people sit back and will make comments or just be thankful to the Lord for the help that this child has gotten. Okay, now let's look at this next one. There's actually two scenarios here, so I'm going to talk about both of them with the remediation that went on. This is cited in Matthew 20, Mark 10, and Luke 18, and there is some discussion as to whether or not these are the exact same story or if they're two different stories, because in Matthew it says there's two blind men by the road, but in Mark and Luke it says just blind Bartimaeus. And so it could be two different scenarios or it could be one, but in either case there's some very similar things in this story that we can draw some stuff from. So I'm going to go ahead and read them, and then we'll look at the things that we can pull from it. So Matthew, behold, two blind men were sitting by the wayside. When they heard that Jesus passed by, they cried out, saying, Have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David. And the crowd rebuked them, saying that they should be silent. But they cried the more, saying, Have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David. And Jesus stood still and called them and said, What do you desire that I should do to you? And they said to him, Lord, that our eyes may be opened. So Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. And immediately their eyes received sight, and they followed him. And then Mark 10. They came to Jericho, and as he and his disciples and a large crowd went out of Jericho, blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the side of the highway begging. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And many warned him that he should be quiet, but he cried out a great deal more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stood still and commanded him to be called. And they called the blind man, saying to him, Be of good comfort, rise up, he is calling you. And casting away his garment, he rose up and came to Jesus. And answering, Jesus said to him, What do you desire that I should do to you? And the blind man said to him, Lord, that I may see again. And Jesus said to him, Go, your faith has healed you. And instantly he saw again, and he followed Jesus in the way. So here's an interesting scenario that often happens in environments, unfortunately, with people who struggle or have disabilities. The crowd will say, just go away. We don't want to bother with you. You're weird. You're different. We don't want anything to do with you. Just be quiet. Don't bother the people who are important. Just step back and get out of the way. These individuals had to be so convinced that they were doing what God wanted them to do in asking for help that they were going to push through even this criticism and this censure and this pushback and say, no. We know that Jesus can help us, so we're going to come to Jesus and we're going to ask him for help. So they're pushing through the criticism, they're pushing through the censure, they're pushing through all of the challenges to get to Jesus and ask for help. But here's the thing, they still had to ask him for help, and he asked them, what do you want me to do for you? Because initially they just said, have mercy on us. And so Jesus said, well, tell me exactly what you want. And so they said that you would give us our sight. And then he gave them their sight, and they were able to see again. Instantly, they saw again. And then they followed Jesus. But he made them talk and tell what they needed, even though he already knew it, which is interesting because, again, sometimes we try to anticipate what somebody needs or we try to do whatever, but sometimes they need to say specifically, here is the help that I need. Can you help me with this? And it helps them to articulate. I think of James 5 where it says, confess your faults to one another and pray for one another that you might be healed. Sometimes we need to articulate what the challenge is or what the problem is in order to get the help that we need. And that's what Jesus was looking for in that situation. And again, he touched them. So touch is something that Jesus did a lot when he was working with people appropriately, touching them. And the thing that's interesting here is the person who could help actually had to stop the crowd. So sometimes when you're in an academic environment or something like that, and you see people making fun of somebody who can't do, or degrading them, or making snide remarks, you actually have to step in. And I've had to do this, where I've had to say to other people, stop. You don't know what you're talking about here. You're out of line with the way that you are speaking to this young person or speaking about this young person. Here's some things that you need to consider in this whole situation, and send them to me. Let me see them. Let me talk to them. Let's figure out what's really going on, and then we can get a better answer rather than just making judgment calls. Jesus had to intervene and tell that crowd to bring them forward. Okay, so I think enough on that one. Let's move on to the next one. Number 5, let's look at a resource model. Matthew 21, the blind and the lame came to him in the temple. Now, one we saw before, he was in a house, and they came to him there, and he healed them. So some he walked by where they were, like I've already listed before, and then others, they had to go specifically to a specific place for help. And that's kind of like the resource model in school systems, where sometimes you have people and they just need to come in for a little bit and get some help, and then they can move on with what they're doing in other academic areas. Which I thought was kind of interesting when I was thinking through these stories, how there's just all these different scenarios of what Jesus does when he works with people who are blind, because we're only focusing on one disability here. But you can see even with just one disability, again, that Jesus does different things with different people. Okay, number 6. Let's look at this one. This is kind of a more self-contained one-on-one instruction and help situation. Mark 8. Jesus came to Bethesda, and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town, and when he had spat on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. He looked up and said, I see men as trees walking. And after that, he put his hands again on his eyes and made him look up, and he was restored and saw everything clearly. So here's the thing that's interesting about this. Some disabilities need to be brought by others, and then the work has to be done separate from the crowd. So this is more like a self-contained, off to the side. Jesus leads him out of town before he starts to work with him. Then he spends some extra time with him. Like he spits on his eyes, he puts his hands on him, and then he asks him what he sees. And it's interesting to note, that others brought him. It makes me think that he probably really didn't have the confidence in and of himself that anything would happen, and the fact that it took Jesus 2 different steps to help him before he was fully healed, because he needed to develop his ability to believe more. And Jesus was assessing his growth throughout this process. So sometimes we're in situations where we see somebody who's struggling and we know they need help, and we come to them and we say, hey, let me take you to somebody who can help you. And they might go, well, no. And you have to encourage them to go. And then when they go, they're still not sure, and they're still asking questions, and they're still not quite sure how to proceed. And so the person who's helping has to ask questions and assess and keep working through it. And then that person ends up developing the confidence that they need to go forward. So, you can think about that with coaching. You can think about that in just other areas of life. So in this situation, it wasn't just a quick, okay, here, ping, your sight's given to you. Jesus was working with this individual because he needed to grow in his faith and his trust. All right, last one, number 7, remediation and follow-up. John 9, 1 through 7. In passing by, he saw a man who was blind from his birth, and his disciples asked him, saying, Jesus, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answered, neither has this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God might be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night comes when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And when he had spoken these things, he spat on the ground and made clay from the spittle, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. Therefore he went and washed and came seeing. And then farther on down in the story, I didn't put that verse in there, Jesus actually went and sought him out again and asked him if he believed in Jesus. And the man at that point still didn't know who he was, because he had gone to the pool of Siloam to wash, and that's when he actually he got his sight back. So then he said to Jesus, well, I don't know who he is. And Jesus said, well, I am he. And he immediately believed in him. But I think the thing that's significant in this situation, Jesus went out of his way and did even more in this healing process. He did more work. He actually got down on the ground and made clay and put it on his eyes. And then he still made the guy go and do some things on his own. He had to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. He's making him take ownership. But I think it's interesting that Jesus did more with this man and then followed up with him more, because he had been so degraded his whole life that he was a sinner, and that's why he was like he was, and he had lived with his criticism his whole life. So he spent more time with him to help him be strengthened and encouraged in the battle against those who were angry that he got healed, which is interesting. You get somebody that gets the help, and other people are upset because they've gotten the help that they need, and they're jealous or whatever. He had lived his life with criticism. He needed more personal encouragement before he could face the criticism again. And so Jesus did. He went to him later and encouraged him further. So again, those more things that we can do when it comes to working with any kind of disability. We're needing to go to them. Sometimes we really have to go out of our way. Sometimes we have to spend extra time. These are just the principles that we can gather from these things. And those of you who are in different environments related to disabilities or with your children or other people, you're understanding lots more examples that I haven't cited here for the sake of time, where somebody needed more help, or sometimes somebody just needed this help and then they were good to go. But you can see, just even with one disability, how many different ways Jesus approached it, looked at it, and individualized the instruction for the people who needed it. So just again, let's recap with some concluding thoughts. One size does not fit all. We need to look at people as individuals and ask the questions and figure out exactly what they need. One disability does not have just one set of remedies. There's several different ways that we can approach what somebody needs based on sometimes what's going on in their heart as much as what's going on with their academics or their other struggles that they have. And then the support levels need to fit in the need of that individual as well, not just their disability, but other needs that they have in their heart. And key one, give as much ownership as possible to the person, focusing on what they can do and what they do believe. The more ownership you hand to that person, the more you challenge them to take a step outside of their comfort zone and do more, the more they grow and learn. And Jesus did that. We have to treat the people the way they need it, to their best for God's kingdom. I could have pulled more things out of this, and I'm sure some of you, as you're watching this, probably saw some things, but I'm going to leave it for right now for you to think about. And once again, if you like what I'm doing and think others could benefit from it, like and share and comment below, and then subscribe to this channel and tell others about it. That would be help. I'd love your help in getting the word out to others who could benefit from learning how to think this way, think biblically related to education and special education. And I wish you a blessed day in the Lord.